Hey everybody, Tony D with another screenwriting tip, and this one's about larger than life characters. So what's a larger than life character? Well, it's a character that kind of consumes a screenplay. They are the driving force behind almost everything that happens, and people really like them, and their personality, and the plot drive everything forward in your screenplay. And really, a lot of times these stories are named after the main character, or they are referenced in the title. So, but there's a danger. The main danger in larger than life characters is that they will completely consume the story, the plot, and the other characters to the point at which everything will be subsumed to your larger than life character, and that's bad. That's pushing it off a cliff, and that's too much. I'll give you an example of what I see as a problem character. If you've ever seen the movies Beverly Hills Cop, right? The main character is Axel Foley, played by Eddie Murphy at his prime. And if you watch the first movie, it's a great movie. First movie's great. It's a very well balanced movie, and you'll notice that Axel is really a larger than life character to some degree. He's the main character. He's the protagonist. The movie's called Beverly Hills Cop, and it's a play on words, and really he's the Beverly Hills Cop. He's really a Detroit cop, but he comes to Beverly Hills to solve a mystery, and everybody hates him. Everybody in the first movie kind of hates Axel and is mad at him for one reason or another, except his best friend. And he's out to avenge his friend at all cost. And you're watching the first movie, you don't know how this is going to go, and that's what makes it great, and it makes it funny. The whole fish out of water thing. And the movie was such a hit, they did a sequel. Now, in the sequel, Axel became more of a center point of the movie, and the characters liked him more. The Beverly Hills police detectives who had met him in the first movie meet him again, and they already know him and they already like him, so they don't give him as much guff as they did before. But they give him a little, and they're sort of like kind of like mildly annoyed by his antics this time. And it's like, oh, Axel. But for the most part, that movie's okay. It's not as good as the first one in my view, but it's still pretty good. It's still a pretty watchable movie. But Eddie Murphy in that movie eats up more of the scenes. And in fact, I vaguely remember, and I think this was with 2, that in Beverly Hills Cop 2, there was a big article about, I believe it was Gilbert Gottfried, who was in the movie. I think that was in 2. And they said he stole the scene from Eddie because he was so funny in that one scene. I think it was Gilbert, if I'm remembering correctly. Then in 3, that character didn't come back. And I think that's when it started, the Axel Foley character, and maybe this was largely to do with Eddie's ego. I don't know that for sure. I'm not throwing shade, but the character just sort of consumed the entire movie. And then by the 4th movie, it was just like he was like some kind of superhero, some sort of godly man who walked the earth. That it didn't quite work at that point. I felt the movie was imbalanced because there was this idea that, oh, Axel Foley's coming to town like Santa Claus, and he's going to change everything and make it all right. It's not really the sort of mode you want to be in. You wanted to duplicate the success of the first movie, and you wanted to have Axel be a guy who, in fact, if I had written a Beverly Hills Cop sequel, I could tell you exactly what I would have done I would have kept 2. On 3, I would have made it that the cops from Beverly Hills come to Detroit. And Axel is being Axel, and then the Beverly Hills cops come, and they're the fish out of water, and they kind of become the main characters, sort of, and it's all a reversal, while the Beverly Hills cops guys embarrass Axel. And he has to sort of make them more hard to stand up to all the horrible things that are happening in Detroit. Which would have been a fun sort of take on it. But they kind of didn't go that way. From what I understand. I didn't really see all of the third movie, I don't think. I don't remember. It's been so long. Another character that is sort of a larger in life character is the main character played by Matthew McConaughey in the Dallas Buyers Club. And that's more of a drama. But his character is the driving force behind the entire story, right? He gets HIV, and he starts hunting down the drugs. He starts hunting down the drugs and because he's determined not to die from this terrible disease. And it's based on a true story. But, McConaughey's performance moves it forward, and his character moves it forward. Because without him, without this sort of like heroic guy sort of taking the reins and doing this, it would just be, it wouldn't be the same. I deal with that in my own work. In the Pineys, I have a larger-than-life character named Hemingway Galloway, the world's greatest hunter, and I have to be wary that Hemingway doesn't completely consume the stories. Although he's a main part of it, I have to also give the other characters their due whenever I can. So there's a balance there. So one thing you need to do. Now, it's harder with movies when you have a situation like a big star like Eddie Murphy, and he kind of pushes out the other side characters for more scenes for himself. But, there's not much you can do about that. But in the long run, I feel that makes for a lesser movie, and Eddie's actually shooting himself in the foot because I think he ended up hurting those sequels because of that, because they become just his ego rather than a good movie. And with sequels, you got to be careful too. That people are like, well, you got to surprise me. You got to surprise me in a sequel. We want to see different things happening in a sequel. We don't want to see the same movie over and over and over and over again. We already saw all these movies. You want to either push the plot forward if it's a sort of a plot-based thing, or you just want to do something completely different. But larger-than-life characters, Captain Kirk to some extent is a larger-than-life character, but it's really more of an ensemble piece. So he needs the other characters to be a supporting of him because they're a whole crew of people. But, Kirk in his own way tends to be, a larger-than-life heroic figure that the other characters rally behind and support. And there is a danger that, he can just overwhelm the movie. It'll all be about Kirk. I mean, you could totally see that, right? You could see a movie where you hardly see the rest of the crew of the Enterprise, and Kirk just, goes off and has a love story, and then, fights some aliens, and then comes back to the ship, and, he's. There were some episodes like that on the original Star Trek series, and but unfortunately, whether or not that's a good story is debatable. But the problem then becomes actually making the damn thing when you're talking about an ensemble cast, right? So in that world, you would have had trouble getting those extra people back because they were taking a back seat to Shatner, and they all wanted equal time on screen too. Especially Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley. They were like the triad of power in that group. But so larger-than-life characters, you just kind of have to keep them on a leash. So you see enough of them that people get kind of their fan service. You get the satisfaction of what these characters do. James Bond, another character, larger than life. But you need lots of stuff around him to make that character work. And you can go too far. Quantum of Solace, as I've talked about in many videos. When you look at, more of the classic Bond films like, Goldfinger, which is like my favorite one. The great thing about that movie is Bond is a larger-than-life figure, but so is Goldfinger. Goldfinger is an equal measure, just as big and boisterous as Bond is. He's just evil. And he's got kind of a different deal going on. That's part of the problem with the dynamic of the Bond movies. Like, you need a guy who can stand up to a larger-than-life character. And you need to make that character larger than life. I think one of the problems with Daniel Craig, although I think he's a decent Bond, and he was really good in the first one, he was in Casino Royale, he's not larger than life. I don't think he's as larger than life. When you ground things into reality, to the point at which, okay, look at this guy. He's like in such great shape, and he can parkour. I mean, this is a guy who can, really do all this crazy stuff. There was a certain swagger to Sean Connery, and he would do kind of impossible things. And then you had Roger Moore, who did really impossible things when it got campy. And those two guys really did larger than life Bonds, whereas some of the more Pierce Brosnan and Craig are doing more like grounded versions of 007, and it doesn't work as well, mainly because of reasons I talked about in the previous video. So keep your larger than life characters large is the lesson, but don't let them consume the entire screenplay. Remember that there's a supporting cast for them, and and they need to get their due too. You need to follow the basics. You need to have all the elements of a screenplay. You need to have the 3 acts. You need to have a protagonist and an antagonist. You need to have a hero's journey. Just because they're a larger in life character doesn't mean they won't learn something. And be careful. The danger is for writers to fall in love with their own characters. They often fall in love with their own works to the point they just can't see the forest from the trees. Don't fall in love with your characters. I know you love them, but absence makes the heart grow fonder. So every once in a while you got to pull back and not overdo it with your larger than life character. And that's my screenwriting tip for today. Please check out my books at Amazon.com, Woke a Standard Novel, Political Satire, and of course The Pineys, books 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Available ebook, trade paperback, Kindle Unlimited is free. Audiobooks coming soon, and we will see you next time.